So I gave myself a little while to process Peacemaker Season 2, and now I'm back with the season review, and I think my opinion has solidified on this season, being a big downgrade from Season 1, and also maybe an essential building block for the future of the DCU that might age very well. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe, and become a member in the Noble tier or above for early access to videos, or the King tier for a special shout out. Big thanks to these members for the extra support. To start this review, let's discuss some of the technical aspects of the show, like the acting, writing, music, and visuals, basically most of the foundations, off of which I will go into a lot of tangents discussing most of the series anyway. The acting was always at least good, with some very clear standout moments. Gunn kept going on and on about how impressed he was by John Cena, and how much better he was compared to Season 1. This was definitely true. John Cena had a lot of great moments, better than anything he had in Season 1. But I don't think it was to the point that James Gunn hyped it up to be. If anything, it was actually Jennifer Holland who I feel like had the biggest improvement, and the best acting moments of the season. There's a lot of things that Gunn hyped up behind the scenes that really raised my expectations for that thing, only for that thing to end up being just fine, and for me to find other things that he didn't really talk about a lot more interesting and compelling. The writing specifically refers to the dialogue, which was generally very good. I honestly don't remember ever being blown away or impressed by a line specifically because of the writing, outside of the realm of comedy. Some of the comedy is absolutely genius, like the bird blindness joke, any of the scenes of the two vigilantes interacting, or Vigilante, Flurry, and also Economos in general. If there's one thing in the season that I have no complaints about, and there are a few, it's the comedy. The comedy here is top notch, some of it incredibly clever and incredibly funny. But again, outside of the comedy, the actual writing of dialogue, nothing really blew me away as far as I remember, unfortunate because there are moments in Season 1 where I was. Visually speaking, the season was a bit hit or miss. The intro dance probably would have blown my mind if it wasn't for the precedent set by Season 1. Unfortunately for this intro, I have something to compare it to, and unfortunately the thing I'm comparing it to was a bit better. I do really like Oh Lord, but I loved Do You Want to Taste It? I really like the dance and the background visuals of the Season 2 intro, but I love the dance and the background visuals of the Season 1 intro. To me, the biggest indicator is that while in Season 1, I never once wanted to skip the intro, by the end of this season, I honestly kind of did. What I mean by the visuals of the season are hit or miss is that if I'm being honest, just thinking back to the season, how I picture it in my mind, I remember it being quite dark, gray, yellow, and brown. That said, there is a lot of good standout visuals. The QUC always looks great, the alternate dimensions have some great visuals, anything involving Eagly looks great, the boat scene has some great visuals, and whenever Peacemaker or Vigilante wears their suits, the show automatically has at least something interesting visually on screen. Unfortunately, and this is quite the opposite from Season 1, a decision I really don't understand, Chris and Adrian barely wore their suits. There's only one scene where Chris wears his classic suit and helmet, and just a handful more where he wears any part of the Earth 2 suit. Meanwhile, Adrian didn't suit up until episode 6. Honestly, what the hell? Literally one of my favorite aspects of Season 1 were how often they wore their suits. It makes it feel more like a comic book and makes both Chris and Adrian far more entertaining to watch. Going into this season, as Gunn kept describing it as the Chris Smith season rather than Peacemaker, I thought maybe I won't notice that much. Wow, did I notice. Chris has the same general depth of character, he's as compelling and as interesting, but his entertainment value takes a nosedive. It doesn't just make him more boring visually and make him just a person rather than a superhero, but also it ruins the juxtaposition of somebody so silly looking being so serious. Peacemaker is a fascinating character. Chris Smith is a fine character. Adrian is similar. He's great. He's hilarious. I like him, but I don't love Adrian Chase. I love Vigilante. Again, it's the juxtaposition. Vigilante all suited up, being incredibly badass while speaking like an idiot is so funny. There's just something so much more interesting, compelling, and funny about Adrian when he's in a suit. It was so frustrating when Adrian didn't suit up until episode 6, and even more frustrating how little Peacemaker suited up, especially since the finale didn't include Peacemaker at all. I guess that also speaks to the general superheroics this season and how there simply wasn't nearly enough. This showed itself in the costumes, but also the action. There's just not enough action. Eagly has a cool action scene, Chris has maybe 2 great action scenes, both outside of costume, and the 11th Street Kids have one cool short team up, and that's pretty much it. Not nearly enough, and certainly lacking that big finale action set piece, which in and of itself brings me to the pacing of the season and how that leads to the finale. What made the finale so disappointing? In terms of the pacing, season 1 was very straightforward, going from point A to B to C all the way to episode 8, and each episode kind of building upon the last and going in a very natural order. Things were clearly set up and satisfyingly paid off in everything from the story to the characters to recurring lines of dialogue. Season 1, in my opinion, was a near masterpiece. Season 2 was not that at all. The pacing was very off. The season was way too slow for the first 5 episodes and then way too quick for 2, and then, surprise surprise, ends on an epilogue, not a finale. It was hyped up as an epic finale, but it's not that. It's an epilogue and more like a first episode for something we're going to be getting in the future. In the first 5 episodes, it took forever for Chris to finally decide to move to Earth 2. Argus just kept on coming again and again after Chris, and almost nothing of substance really happened. It almost entirely consisted of setup, 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 setup. The next 2 episodes then moved at a breakneck pace in extremely short and then shortening episodes that didn't end up exploring Earth 2 nearly enough, and almost nothing from there paid off in the end. The Sons of Liberty, Vigilante, Rick Flag Jr., Captain Triumph, no payoff. And then came the finale, which flabbergasted me, especially because of how much James Gunn was hyping it up. I really don't understand what he was thinking there. He was hyping this up as like the craziest episode ever, hyping it up as an insane finale when it ended up being an epilogue. There's no payoff to the general lack of Peacemaker with him finally putting the suit on, for instance. No payoff for the general lack of action with the big action set piece. No payoff for the Earth 2 storyline, and no payoff for the shortening episodes, because while the finale was very long, so much of it was dedicated to musical performances that it might as well have been 10 to 15 minutes shorter. The finale wasn't the epic conclusion the season desperately needed and what Gunn hyped up. It was an epilogue serving more so than anything to set up the future. Because of that, the season does not stand on its own. It's a single chapter in a book rather than a book in a book series, the antithesis to what Gunn said he wants each project to be. Looking at the MCU, Iron Man 2 and Age of Ultron stand out as projects that do a lot of setup and don't quite stand on their own because of it. Peacemaker Season 2 I do think can be similar, not great in its own right, but important for the future of the DCU with the creations of Checkmate and Salvation, meaning maybe in the future we'll look back at this and think, okay, the DCU could not have worked without that, maybe sacrificing its individuality as a project, sure, but looking back at Iron Man 2 for instance, nobody considers that to be a great movie, even if it is maybe essential for phase 1 of the MCU. I think the same could be true for Peacemaker Season 2, and with Peacemaker Season 2, we don't even know yet if it's actually going to accomplish that, although it does seem like it probably will. Speaking of the pacing this season, I really like the fact that each episode had a cold open flashback. I like when a show deviates in some small way from a typical TV show format, and having a flashback cold open accomplishes that, except 2 of the episodes just didn't. Really weird breaking from that unique format. It'd be like if in Creature Commandos, 2 episodes randomly did not have a flashback backstory when the rest did. Still, I think most of the cold opens connect really well to what the episode focuses on, and that works really well for the episode. The exception to this was episode 2, where Flag appeared in the cold open and focused on him, but then he did not appear again in the episode. That's the only one I don't think worked. I'm being pretty negative here, but there are a few things I really liked about the season. Alongside the comedy, like I mentioned earlier, the season also excels in the music department. Oh Lord, while a small downgrade from Do You Want to Taste It, is a great intro song, and the season went on to have some fantastically fitting musical moments with Gunn's signature talent for finding the perfect song for a scene. I actually added 4 songs to my likes on Spotify, more than I did in season 1 if I remember correctly. However, the music also is a big detriment to the season because the finale focusing on the musical performances of those 2 bands pissed me off. Can we not dedicate 10 minutes to these musical performances? If I wanted to watch this, I'd just watch it on YouTube. The season also excels in its universe interconnectivity. The previously on segment, for instance, masterfully retcons what needed to be retconned from the DCEU, the Green Lantern deleted scene being added in, and the Justice League replaced by the Justice Gang. Great stuff. From there, the universe interconnectivity continues to impress, from the Justice Gang recruiting, to Rick Flag Sr.'s role being continued directly from Superman, to Lex Luthor appearing, to Luthor's employees, to the various references to Creature Commandos and Superman. It's not perfect. Flag sometimes feels like a different person compared to Creature Commandos. Luthor's dialogue feels needlessly crass and a bit of a different character compared to Superman, and Luthor's employees doing coke was a bit much, but generally speaking, the universe interconnectivity felt tighter and more well thought out than the MCU has been for a long time, maybe better than it ever has been. This can certainly be attributed to the fact that the 3 projects that were released this year were all written by James Gunn. He was able to connect the projects together pretty seamlessly, bringing back characters when needed, and then justifiably fitting them into other projects. It's great stuff. In terms of world building, this season feels like it did a lot less than it did, maybe because of the execution or maybe because it's a season 2, which brings back a lot of characters, but it doesn't introduce a lot of DC characters. As opposed to Creature Commandos and Superman, which both introduce dozens, this season really only introduces one DC character. There are a lot of original characters, but Sasha Bordeaux is really the only character this season introduces that is given a role, and I like her. She's well cast, given a good role, even if her turn in the end was abrupt. She's a generally good inclusion to the DCU that I am looking forward to seeing more of, which is basically my sentiment for Checkmate and Salvation. Good inclusions that I'm looking forward to seeing more of, even if they did have abrupt introductions. While Checkmate came about pretty quickly, Salvation I do think was set up and executed well. How it built upon Rick Flagg's role in Superman, how it was set up throughout the season with hints here and there, how it eventually paid off. I think Salvation was set up well and executed well. It's honestly actually Rick Flag Sr.'s characterization in Creature Commandos that feels distinctly different from the other two. Rick Flag Sr. does feel like basically the exact same character as Superman, but neither of those Rick Flags feel identical to the Rick Flag in Creature Commandos. Those were the newly introduced characters and conclusions to the stories, but what about the rest of the characters and their stories? Well, I thought Eagly's story was a real highlight. He was a constant source of entertainment and great CGI. The reveal that Red St. Wild was right and that he was actually V Prime Eagle was both hilarious and kind of epic. Between the reveal itself, the visuals, and the music, I just wish this reveal was revealed to Chris, or at least returned with some importance in the finale. Man, the finale could have done so much and did just almost nothing. What it did wrap up was the romantic subplot between Chris and Harcourt that wasn't really a subplot. I don't know, it kind of felt like the main plot, which is unfortunate because I did not love it. I know this isn't a popular opinion, but this romance felt a bit weird to me. I rarely felt any strong chemistry. Chris bringing up the boat again and again and again felt tiring, and then the moment of Chris saying he'll come back if Harcourt admits she loves him after sleeping with her Earth 2 counterpart felt very manipulative, especially with the previous episode making the letter Chris left behind feel like a suicide note, and in that note, he kind of disses Harcourt. I don't know, I didn't love this. It doesn't feel romantic at all. What was romantic was the boat scene, which was surprising. I expected it to be sexual, but that was the only moment where I felt their chemistry. But that's not enough. That was the crux of the finale. That's what everything led up to. This romance acted as the main thing the finale paid off, but honestly, there were like 5 or 6 things I would have preferred for them to have paid off. I mean, that would have been a bit weird if they didn't, but that being the focus of the finale, it just didn't click for me. I didn't like it. The first few episodes did a great yet really slow job at foreshadowing what Earth 2 really is. It was fun to see the fear rising from week to week. The hints were all really well placed, the foreshadowing was great, and the final reveal was also really great, even if at that point it wasn't exactly surprising. Nazi world aside, the season definitely also did a good job at making it believable that Chris would genuinely want to move there. Rejected by the Justice Gang or the superhero community and Harcourt, hunted by Argus, and with a loving family in Earth 2, some of the highlights of the season were Chris interacting with his father and brother, or teaming up with them. It definitely held some emotional weight. The conclusion to this was similarly emotional, Augie being revealed to not actually be a Nazi, just to die, and then Captain Triumph's ambush reminding Chris of his brother's death, following which he let out a visceral scream, was pretty powerful. This then leads to Chris feeling like he is surrounded by death, or brings death wherever he goes, leading into the emotional conclusion with Leota's speech in the motel, which I think was the most complete and satisfying arc this season. Chris's journey to this point of self-reflection and self-acceptance worked really well and surrounded Leota's speech. Leota really didn't do much this season aside from be a part of what is, in my opinion, the worst scene of the season by far, but her speech made me tear up and perfectly concluded Chris's arc. Her completely letting her wife go was also pretty heartbreaking. As for the rest of the characters, Vigilante didn't change much, but he did show emotion a few times, which was very interesting, and while it's pretty awful, I did like his interactions with his mother. Economos felt more confident and competent, which I really liked. The season made me want Judo Master to join the 11th Street Kids, and I liked the Checkmate lineup. Harcourt's story was mostly fine. I liked seeing her open up emotionally, but again, it mostly surrounded romance I didn't quite connect to, and far too many random men hitting on her. Can we move on from that trope? trope. Rick Flag felt like he took a swift turn from having an understandable vendetta against Peacemaker into evil villainy as he reacted to the agent's deaths with laughter. I guess solidifying him as the season's main villain, but honestly, as a season main villain, not great. He wasn't really the driving force behind the main plot, or even the secondary main plot. Potential for villainous roles in the future now are huge. Again, it's more of a setup situation where this can be looked back on fondly, but as a product in its own right, not great. It can be argued that actually it was Peacemaker himself who was the main villain, being the driving force behind a lot of what went wrong this season, a driving force behind the plot the heroes have to undo. This all comes down to the pacing and storytelling, but the plot this season was all over the place. The placements of the protagonists and antagonists were so confusing and muddled, nothing ever solidified into place. It felt so weird. I wish this season had a driving force or a clear antagonist. I wish Peacemaker felt like the main character and was in costume. I wish the season stood on its own. I wish I felt more satisfied with the season, but as it stands, I am not. So basically, the season has a lot of good, but it's mostly set up leading into an unsatisfying conclusion and a finale that isn't actually a finale, but rather an epilogue, and in and of itself, even more setup. Peacemaker Season 2, I think, pales in comparison to Season 1. It was a fun watch with great music and comedy and might pay off down the line, but it doesn't stand on its own, doesn't offer its own well-developed, self-contained story, and is, in my opinion, James Gunn's worst outing in the worlds of Marvel and DC. Going off the ratings I gave throughout the season, the average actually is a 7.8, which is pretty good, but some of these scores were with the benefit of the doubt that the setups would be paid off. They weren't, and thus, the season is, in my opinion, worse than the sum of its parts. I'm giving this season a 6 out of 10. As a huge James Gunn fan, I am looking forward to a year of DC content where nothing is written by him because, honestly, this season has set in a bit of James Gunn fatigue for me that will absolutely wear off by the time Man of Tomorrow comes out.